Joining us now on the show, writer and director Jonathan Lynn. Jonathan, thanks for taking some time to chat today.
It's a pleasure.
You know, Clue will be turning 30 later this year, and when I was growing up, this was regularly playing on the VH player in my house. It was the first feature film that you directed. What did you learn from that experience that you've applied to future films that you've directed?
Oh, well, I learned everything. I'd never made a film before. I'd made one 25-minute short 2 years earlier. And I'd been directing in the theater for 10 years. So directing actors wasn't an issue for me, unlike many film directors who come from the more technical side. Directing the actors was the relatively easy part. What was hard was learning that what the eye sees is different from what the camera sees. In other words, I've been directing in the theater for years. And in the theater, you see the whole picture. You see the whole stage. So in a very broad comedy, or what on the stage would be called a farce, like Clue, you can see lots of things happening simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes them funny. In film, you can't. It's all a question of focusing the camera precisely where you need it at the exact second that you need it. So what I really started to learn about was editing, and just about the use of the camera, and it was very difficult in Clue because we had 7 or 8 principal characters on screen for almost the entire film.
Right, yeah.
And, in most movies you have 1 or 2 or maybe 3 principal characters. You may have thousands of extras, but you don't have many principal characters you have to keep track of geographically the whole time. And in this film I had to. So it would have been a tricky film for any director. It was a nightmare for me. I was I was learning every day, and I made a lot of mistakes, but it came out okay anyway.
When you were brought in to write the script, how fleshed out was the story so far?
It wasn't.
It wasn't?
What it was I was brought in to write the script. I didn't know, but I was the 6th writer. Nobody had mentioned there had been 5 before me who had all given up, including Tom Stoppard, who had given up completely and sent the check back. I must say, when I heard the idea, when it was, make a film based on a board game, I thought this was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. It was, the first time I think anyone ever made a film based on a board game. Now It's commonplace.
Yeah.
So John Landis pitched me essentially the events, in very rough terms, in a 10-minute pitch, roughly the events of the film. How all the characters arrive, and then this happens, and then that happens. And John was a very energetic man. He was running around his office and jumping on the furniture and yelling and screaming and acting out a lot of stuff that's in the movie. And then he said, and then the butler says, "I know who did it." So I was on the edge of my seat, and I said, "Well, who did?" And he said, "I don't know. That's why I need to write it." I had a few rough ideas, but very few, but enough that John hired me to write it. He was going to be the director. So I was hired to write it, and what I realized as I got back on the plane to London, where I lived, was that none of it made any sense at all, because all of these characters, were called Mr. Green, Miss Scarlet, Professor Plum, Colonel Mustard. They're all just colors. There's actually nothing known about them. All the information I had, it was much less than you have if you're adapting a book or a short story or anything. I had 6 colors, 6 weapons, and 9 rules. But there was no reason given why these people all had names that were covered, or what connected them, or anything. So I really had to figure out, why did they all have colors? And they had to be aliases. Who gave them the aliases? That led me to into the plot. So what John pitched to me was a lot of events, but actually no story. You see what I mean? And so I had to make sense. If you call what I wrote making sense, I had to make sense of it all.
Now, were there any early ideas that you toiled with that you decided, no, I just not going to work?
Oh, I expect so, but I can't remember. It's 30 years ago. It was a very strange writing process because it was such a puzzle. I sat and thought for a long time, and then I wrote the first act. That's up to when Mr. Body is killed. That took a week to write, but several weeks to think about. Then it took me, I would say, another 3 months of thinking before I wrote the second act, which is all the way through to when the butler says, "I can tell you who did it." And then I wrote that in a week. And then there was another gap. And I tried to figure out what actually happened. And then I wrote that last act actually in 11 hours on the plane from London to LA. So the whole process took about 6 months. And it was actually 3 weeks of writing and an awful lot of making notes and drawing diagrams. And I never went anywhere without a plan of the board. That, who was where and how come we didn't know they were there, and all that stuff. And the plot actually does make sense, but I don't think anyone's ever understood it except me. And now I can't explain it. I've forgotten.
You mentioned you thought making a board game movie was crazy. Was it a hard sell?
Yeah.
You're casting the actors to convince them to do a
No,
board?
because by then I'd written the script, and people thought the script was very funny. So, no, it wasn't a hard sell. Well, it might have been. Come to think of it, I don't really know. I mean, I did meet quite a lot of actors for the parts, and I got some very good actors. Where maybe lots of other good people turned it down, I wouldn't know. But it didn't seem hard to cast. It was hard to cast for the money. Nobody was very well paid. The film wasn't an expensive movie, and the actors all got $100,000 each, which is not a lot for very successful actors for 8 weeks' work. And it was what we call favored nations in Hollywood, which means everyone had to get the same. Right. So I think that probably ruled out a few big stars. And but no, it didn't seem hard to cast. I was very surprised, for instance, when Madeline Kahn said she wanted to do it. Her agent showed it to her, and I was thrilled. I think she was wonderful. And I wrote a couple of extra scenes for her. Mrs. White was pretty small part, and she said she wanted to do it, so I wrote that up a bit. But no, the casting didn't seem all that hard.
And what makes Clue just really, really special is the dialogue, the one-liners. Was that all in the original script, or once you started filming, did you say, "Oh, I have this person, I want to change some of these lines to fit their personality," or was it kind of you had the script? It
was all in the original script.
Wow!
Except for two things. There were one or two of Mrs. White's scenes I added to, as I told you, when I learned that Madeline might be interested, and then Madeline improv that speech that everyone loves when she says, "I hated her so much."
The flames?
Out of my face. I had no idea she was going to say that. I was waiting for her to say what was in the script. And it was so funny that I never shot what was in the script. That was the only improv, and I don't think I changed anything else at all.
That's amazing. So amazing.
I cut some bits in the cutting room afterwards. But I don't think I changed anything.
That's so impressive. It feels like your dialogue fit with those actors so perfectly. So I guess you get credit for casting the movie really well then.
Yeah, no doubt.
I guess that's right. I think it is well cast. And but good actors, can speak dialogue that works. I mean, mostly I find actors want to improv when the dialogue doesn't.
Right.
you don't do Hamlet. The lead actor doesn't show up and say, maybe I can improv here instead of to be or not to be. I mean, to be or not to be works, so they say it. I found actors on the whole only want to change the lines if they think it doesn't work. I'm not comparing myself to Shakespeare.
No. Right. That's the headline of the whole show.
In the background of Clue, McCarthyism is always there. It's on the Cook's TV. Wadsworth claims his wife was being blackmailed for having communist friends. Why'd you pick that time in that political climate?
Well, it seemed to me that the film needed to have a period feel. It's a country house murder mystery with a butler. That's a thing of the past. You look at old Hollywood movies, there's lots of English butlers, but not anymore. There's only been one since Clue, and that was Arthur. So it had to be, I felt it had to be period. Well, the only period I knew anything about was the 50s, because that's when I grew up. And I've always been very politically interested. I wrote a political satirical series on the BBC for years called Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. And we were actually making the series Yes Prime Minister while we were editing Clue. And I had to actually commute between LA and London for 10 weeks, which was terrible. 3 days in London, 4 days in LA.
Jeez.
Wow.
I've never been quite so disorientated or exhausted in my whole life. But anyway, so I've always been interested in politics. I knew all about the McCarthy period because I'd had an old friend in London when I was a young writer, a guy called Donald Ogden Stewart, who nobody really remembers now, but he wrote about 70 Hollywood movies and won the Oscar for The Philadelphia Story with Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, Dave Stewart. And Don had been blacklisted by the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1954, moved to London, never moved back. So at his house, when I was a young actor, he was an old guy we happened to have met, I got to meet a whole lot of blacklisted American writers, great writers. Waldo Salt, who wrote Midnight Cowboy, Ring Lardner, who wrote the movie of MASH, and Charlie Chaplin, who was blacklisted, and all kinds of extraordinary people. And so, I've been listening to these guys for years talking about this period. I knew a lot about it. So, since I knew it had to be period, and I thought I'd pick that.
So if you had to redo it, knowing what you know now, would you show all the endings like what happened when it's released on home video, or would you have split them up?
Oh, I would never have done that. That was the worst mistake ever. It was the idea that the notion was that people would be so intrigued by the fact that the film had 3 endings that they would go 3 times to see 3 different endings. In fact, the opposite happened. They were so confused that they didn't know which one to go to, so they didn't go at all. It was actually very bad for the box office that we had 3 different endings. Also, it was bad for the script because the ingenuity of the film depends on the fact that it comes out 3 different ways. There are 3 different possible endings, all of which make sense. And, if you only show one of them, it's much less ingenious. So it was a mistake. We should have done what we subsequently did on the VHS, on the DVD, which is to show all 3 endings.
With Landis dealing with the Twilight Zone tragedy, did that have any impact on you or your production?
Yes. I think it's one of the reasons why I got to direct the film. He needed to do bigger and more expensive films because his trial was coming up, and he needed to make a lot of money for his defense.
Oh, man.
I believe. I'm not sure about that, but I think so. It had an effect on one aspect of the film. The scene where the chandelier falls. I was overcautious. The chandelier should have fallen closer to the actors to make a better shot. But I was so determined that there would be no accident on the set, which would have made things so much worse for John Landis.
Yeah.
Although he wasn't even there. And it would just have been catastrophic for him. So I was extra cautious. As a result, that scene was slightly less dramatic and exciting than it could have been.
I see.
So, are you a fan of board games at all?
Oh, board game? No, never. I've played 2 board games. I played 3 board games in my life. I played Clue when I was a kid. I grew up in a house like that in England, which had a grand staircase and lots of big rooms in a conservatory. So I felt I was playing a version of where I lived when I was a kid. It was more beautiful than that house, less Gothic, but it was it had all of those rooms. I played Snakes and Ladders when I was little, and I played Monopoly. But I stopped playing Monopoly because I found people got so angry when you sold property from under them that I didn't want to play it anymore. So no, I'm not a games fan at all. I don't play cards. I don't play chess. I really don't play games much.
But you directed one of the best, probably the best. I can't think of a better board game movie.
No, I think that's a very backhanded compliment. I can't think of a better board game movie. That's not a quote I'm going to use ever.
One of the funniest movies I've ever seen. Jonathan, thank you so much.
That's really nice. That's better. I prefer that.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. My pleasure.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.